The void between stars was not silent on the bridge of the Stalwart, but the hum of its systems was a familiar, almost organic sound, a testament to the generations of human engineering that had tamed the physics of interstellar travel for the purpose of carrying life. For Commander Savin, it was the sound of home, a constant companion through years of patrols along the fringes of human-explored space. He stood before the main viewport, a sheet of reinforced crystal and composites that presented the unvarnished truth of the cosmos, his hands clasped behind his back. His frame, tall and lean, was a common sight in that posture, a man given to quiet contemplation of the abyss he had sworn to protect. The ship was his charge, a vessel of exploration and defense, its mission one of peaceful vigilance. They were far from any major colony, out where the star charts showed more empty space than occupied systems, a frontier that felt both limitless and strangely intimate. It was on the edges, Savin often thought, that one truly felt the scale of existence, the profound solitude of a species that had, against all odds, learned to build its own islands of light and warmth in the crushing dark. The peace was shattered by a strident alert from the sensor station. "Commander, I have an anomalous energy reading," the tactical officer, Jax, reported, his voice cutting through the ambient hum with sharp precision. "Bearing 027, Mark 10, extreme range, but the signature is massive." Savin turned from the viewport, his calm demeanor shifting into one of focused intensity as he moved to stand behind Jax, his eyes scanning the complex data streaming across the display. The energy signature was unlike anything in the Stalwart's extensive databases. It was not the clean output of a human fusion drive or the predictable pulse of a natural cosmological event. This was chaotic, a torrent of power that seemed to violate conventional understanding of physics, a storm of energy that rippled through subspace itself. "Can you get a visual?" Savin asked, his voice low and steady, betraying none of the sudden tension that had gripped the bridge. "Attempting magnification now, sir," the sensor technician replied, her fingers flying across her console. The main viewport shimmered and resolved, zooming in on a distant point of space that now burned with a sickly, pulsating green light. What they saw was not a ship, as humanity understood the concept. It was a grotesque assemblage of organic-looking curves and jagged, metallic protrusions, a leviathan of bone-white chitin and dark, weeping sores of energy that bled into the void. It moved with a horrifying, fluid grace, its structure seeming to shift and writhe as it traveled, as if it were a living creature rather than a constructed vessel. It was larger than any human flagship, a city of nightmares adrift in the void. "Gods above," someone whispered from the communications station, the word hanging in the air like a prayer for a salvation that felt suddenly very distant. "Hail them," Savin ordered, his command breaking the spell of horrified fascination that had fallen over the bridge. All frequencies, standard first contact protocols. For several long minutes, there was no response, only the continued, silent advance of the alien behemoth. Then, the communications officer shook his head. "No response to our hails, Commander." "But I'm detecting localized subspace distortions. It's emitting something, but it's not a communication signal. It's more like a broadcast." Savin's brow furrowed. A broadcast of what? Before the comms officer could answer, the alien vessel's prow seemed to bloom open, revealing a cavernous maw from which a concentrated beam of that same virulent green energy erupted. It did not lance out towards the Stalwart, but instead struck a small, uninhabited planetoid in the nearby system's outer belt. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The rock did not simply explode or melt. It seemed to unravel, its matter dissolving into a swirling, grey slurry that was then drawn back into the alien ship, consumed. It was a display of power that was also a statement of purpose, a demonstration of a technology that was not for travel or communication, but for pure, efficient annihilation and consumption. "It's a harvester," Jack said, his voice tight. That's not a warship, it's a feeder. The tactical display now showed the alien vessel altering its course, its new trajectory a direct intercept with the stalwart. The peaceful vigilance of their mission had evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard reality of a predator in their space. Red alert. All hands to battle stations. Savin's voice was calm, but it carried an edge of steel that brooked no hesitation. The bridge lights dimmed, shifting to a crimson hue as alarms sounded throughout the ship. Helm, evasive pattern delta. Jacks, charge the primary plasma batteries and ready missile tubes 1 through 10. Target that vessel's energy signature. The stalwart was a vessel of the line, well-armed and armored, but facing the sheer, monstrous scale of the alien harvester, Savin felt a profound sense of vulnerability. They were a watchdog facing a star leviathan. The alien ship closed the distance with terrifying speed, its organic form gliding through the void as if space itself offered no resistance. As it drew near, smaller shapes detached from its surface, swarming towards the stalwart like insects from a hive. They were fighters, or something analogous, each one a smaller version of the mothership's horrific aesthetic, moving with a skittering, unpredictable agility. Incoming hostiles, Jax announced, his hands moving over his console, assigning targeting priorities to the point defense network. 50+ contacts. The space between the two capital ships erupted into a storm of light and kinetic death. The stalwart's point defense cannons spat streams of tungsten slugs, shredding the lead alien fighters in flashes of ruptured chitin and viscous fluid. Plasma bolts, searing globes of contained starfire, lanced out from the human ship's main batteries, striking the harvester's hide. The impacts were spectacular, but the damage seemed superficial. The organic metal appeared to absorb and dissipate the energy, healing with a visible, nauseating rapidity. The alien fighters returned fire with beams of corrosive green energy that ate away at the stalwart's armored hull, bypassing conventional defenses by literally dissolving the molecular bonds of the metal. Damage reports began to flood the bridge, voices calling out breaches in the lower decks, loss of power to the port thrusters, and casualties among the crew. Savin gripped the command rail, his knuckles white. This was not a battle, it was a systematic dismantling. Their most powerful weapons were mere irritants to the colossal harvester, while its swarming children were slowly, methodically consuming his ship. Their technology, it's adaptive, the chief science officer, a woman named Anya, reported from her station, her voice strained. Our weapons are becoming less effective with each strike. It's learning, evolving its defenses in real time. A particularly violent impact shook the bridge, sending sparks raining from an overloaded console. Direct hit on Deck 7, hull breach is contained, but we've lost primary life support on that level, the damage control officer yelled over the cacophony. Savin watched on the tactical display as another flight of alien fighters broke through their defensive screen and concentrated their fire on the stalwart's engineering section. The ship groaned, a deep, metallic sound of agony that vibrated through the deck plates. "We can't withstand much more of this, Commander," Jax stated, the grim truth laid bare. "Their weapons ignore our armor. Our shields are useless against that corrosive energy. We're being eaten alive." Savin looked around his bridge, at the faces of his crew, young and old, all etched with fear and determination. They were looking to him for a miracle, for the command that would pull them from the jaws of this impossible foe. He had no new tactics, no secret weapon. He had only the stark, unyielding reality of their situation. To stay was to die, and to die without even slowing this thing down. His duty was to his crew, to the people sleeping in cryopods, to the families they all had back in the core systems who needed to be warned. "Helm," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos with a forced, resonant calm. "Plot a randomized jump, maximum distance. Now." The helmsman, a young officer named Riven, didn't question the order. His hands flew across his console, spooling up the shift drive. "We need 30 seconds. 30 seconds was an eternity. The alien harvester seemed to sense their intent. It ceased its own forward motion and began to gather energy at its prow, the same terrible green light concentrating into a sphere of incandescent destruction that promised absolute consumptive oblivion. "They're preparing another of those main weapons," Jax warned, his voice rising in pitch. "Targeting our drive section. Impact in 20 seconds." The stalwart shuddered under a renewed, concentrated assault from the fighter's swarm, its point defense networks overwhelmed. Alarms blared, warning of imminent core breach. "Divert all non-essential power to the aft shields," Savin ordered, a desperate gambit. "And someone get me a firing solution on that weapon aperture. All remaining missiles, full spread." It was a futile gesture, a gnat stinging a titan, but it was all he had. The missiles streaked away, a final, defiant salvo. They detonated against the harvester's face, a brilliant series of flashes that did nothing to slow the building cataclysm. The green sphere pulsed, ready to fire. "Shift drive is ready," Riven shouted. Jumping now, the universe outside the viewport stretched and twisted, the stars becoming streaks of light as the stalwart violently wrenched itself from the grip of normal spacetime. The last thing Savin saw before the shift was the lance of green energy erupting from the harvester, passing through the space where his ship had been a fraction of a second before. The transition was brutal, the ship groaning and protesting as it was flung across light years in an instant. When the viewport stabilized, they were in the empty blackness of a new, uncharted system. The immediate threat was gone, but the silence on the bridge was heavier, more profound than any alarm. They had survived, but they were wounded, bleeding air and hope into the void. And they carried with them the terrible knowledge that humanity was no longer alone in the universe, and that what shared the darkness with them was a hunger that consumed worlds. The stalwart drifted in the silent deep of a red dwarf system, its wounds starkly visible under the worklights of the repair crews that swarmed over its hull like diligent ants tending a wounded queen. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the smell of ozone, scorched metal, and fear. Commander Savin moved through the corridors, his face a mask of composed authority, but his mind was a whirlwind of the images from the battle. The way the alien ship moved, the way it fed, the utter indifference it had shown to their existence until they had become an obstacle to its consumption. He reached the main briefing room where his senior officers were already assembled. Their faces were grim, smudged with soot and fatigue. Jack sat with his arms crossed, his usual confident posture replaced by a tense rigidity. Anya, the science officer, was pale, her eyes fixed on the datapad in front of her as if it contained a ghost. "Report," Savin said, his voice echoing in the quiet room as he took his seat at the head of the table. Jax was the first to speak. "Casualty reports are still coming in, but we lost 43 crew confirmed, with another 20 seriously injured. The damage to the ship is extensive. The port thrusters are offline, our primary sensor array is a melted ruin, and we have hull breaches on 6 decks. Most critically, the shift drive is damaged. The emergency jump overloaded the motivators. We can make short, intrasystem hops, but another long-range shift would tear the ship apart." The news was as bad as Savin had feared. They were stranded, crippled, in an unknown and likely uninhabited system. Anya looked up from her datapad, her expression one of deep, unsettling awe. "I've analyzed the sensor data from the engagement. The energy signatures, the material composition of that vessel, Commander, it's beyond anything we've ever theorized. It wasn't just using technology, it was technology, a perfect fusion of biological and mechanical systems. Its power source appears to be a localized singularity, but the containment method is organic. It's a living engine that consumes matter and converts it directly into energy with near-perfect efficiency." She brought up a schematic on the table's central hollow display, a reconstructed model of the harvester. "Their weapons are a form of directed entropy. They don't blast or burn, they accelerate the decay of atomic bonds, reducing complex matter into its base subatomic particles, and then drawing that raw material in for consumption. Our armor, our shields, they were designed to deflect or absorb kinetic and energetic impacts. They are useless against a weapon that simply tells matter to stop being. A cold dread settled in the room. They had faced an enemy whose fundamental approach to physics was alien to their own, a predator that operated on a level of reality humanity had only begun to scratch. And their adaptability, Anya continued, it's not a computational process, it's an immune response. Our weapons were recognized as a foreign pathogen, and the ship's biological systems evolved countermeasures. Each plasma bolt we fired taught its hide how to better resist the next one. So what you're telling me, Savin said slowly, is that we faced an enemy that is, for all intents and purposes, a living, thinking, starfaring organism that eats planets and learns from our attacks, making itself immune. Anya nodded grimly. That is a succinct summary, yes. And based on the energy output and resource consumption rates, that single vessel was a scout, a forager. The logic of its trajectory, before it noticed us, suggested it was moving from one resource-rich system to another. This isn't a lone predator. It's part of a swarm. The word hung in the air, imbued with a new and terrifying meaning. A swarm of world-eaters moving through the galaxy. The strategic implications were apocalyptic. Every human colony, every outpost, every ship was potential fuel. Humanity was not facing an empire to negotiate with or a rival to fight. They were facing a locust plague on a galactic scale, a force of nature that could not be reasoned with, only survived or succumbed to. Our priority is clear, Savin stated, his voice firm, cutting through the despair. We have to get this information back to command. They need to know what's coming. Anya, I want you and your team to compile every byte of sensor data, every analysis, into a single, compressed burst transmission. We'll find a way to boost our signal, use a stellar gravity lens, anything to get a message back to the nearest listening post. Jax leaned forward. With the drive down, that could take weeks, even months, and that's assuming that thing, or others like it, aren't already between us and home. It's a risk we have to take, Savin replied. In the meantime, we repair, we use the resources in this system. There's an asteroid belt with significant metal deposits. We deploy the fabricators, we get the stalwart spaceworthy again. We are not going to die out here in the dark. His determination was a spark in the gloom, and he saw it catch in the eyes of his officers. They had a mission again, a purpose beyond mere survival. They were the warning bell for all of humanity. The following days were a testament to human resilience. The crew, from the lowest-rated technician to the most senior officer, worked with a single-minded focus. Repair teams in environment suits braved the vacuum, cutting away mangled hull plating and welding new sections into place. Engineers worked miracles in the damaged engineering bay, cannibalizing non-essential systems to patch the shift drive motivators. Inside, medics tended to the wounded, and the mess halls became impromptu planning centers. Savin spent his time moving between the bridge, engineering, and the med bay, his presence a steadying force. He listened to the concerns of his crew, shared in their small victories when a system was brought back online, and mourned with them when another body was recovered from a sealed compartment. He saw the fear in their eyes, but he also saw a stubborn, unyielding refusal to be broken. They had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had been hungry, but they were still here. It was during a routine survey of the asteroid belt for raw materials that they found it. A faint, repeating signal buried in the background radiation of the system. It was old, incredibly old, and of unmistakably artificial origin. Anya and her team managed to clean it up, revealing not a communication, but a data stream, a vast repository of information encoded in a complex mathematical language. It took the ship's computational core days to decipher the base code, but when it did, they found a treasure trove. It was the legacy of another species, one that had faced the same harvesters millennia ago. They called themselves the Nagia, and their records were a chronicle of their own extinction. They detailed the biology of the harvesters, which they named the Vora, a word that translated roughly to the unmaking. They mapped the Vora's hive-like social structure, their method of travel through gravitational conduits, and most importantly, they documented their own long, desperate war for survival. The Nagia had been a technologically advanced, peaceful species, masters of biological engineering. They had tried everything to stop the Vora: planet-busting weapons, tailored viruses designed to attack the organic components of the ships, even attempts at communication. Nothing had worked. The viruses were absorbed and adapted, the weapons were consumed, and the Vora were utterly uninterested in dialogue. The Nagia records showed that the only thing that had ever given the Vora pause was a specific form of coherent energy, a resonance frequency that disrupted the Vora's delicate internal singularity and caused a cascading failure in their biological systems. The Nagia had discovered it too late to save their civilization, but they had launched this archive, this warning and this weapon, into the void, hoping it would find someone who could use it. For the first time since the battle, Savin felt a flicker of something other than dread. It was a fragile, desperate hope. They were not just a warning, they were now a key. They had the knowledge to fight back. The race was on to repair the stalwart, integrate this new, alien technology, and bring the fight to the unmaking before it consumed another world, before it found Earth. The stalwart had become a chrysalis of frantic industry, its wounded hull now cradling a secret that could mean the difference between survival and oblivion. The Nagia data core was a puzzle box of alien science, and Anya and her team worked around the clock, their eyes bloodshot from staring at screens, their minds grappling with concepts that stretched human physics to its breaking point. The resonant frequency, the key to damaging the Vora, was not a simple energy weapon. It was a complex, multi-phased emission that needed to be tuned to the specific quantum signature of a Vora ship's core. It was less like firing a laser and more like singing a note that would shatter a specific, unique crystal glass in a room full of them. Commander Savin observed their progress from the doorway of the main lab, a converted cargo bay now filled with humming Nagia-derived equipment, its surfaces smooth and organic, a stark contrast to the angular, utilitarian human technology that surrounded it. "The principle is sound," Anya explained, her voice hoarse with fatigue but buzzing with intellectual excitement. She gestured to a holographic schematic of a Vora harvester, its core a swirling, chaotic knot of energies. The Vora containment field is a masterpiece of bioengineering, but it has a vulnerability. It exists in a state of perpetual, balanced instability. The resonance emitter doesn't attack the field itself. It introduces a specific harmonic vibration that causes the singularity to oscillate beyond its containment parameters. It's like pushing a child on a swing at just the right time. Each push adds more energy until the swing flips over. She manipulated the controls, and the simulation showed the core's oscillation increasing wildly until it ruptured, the uncontrolled singularity consuming the Vora ship from the inside out. The problem is calibration. Each Vora ship, as a unique biological entity, has a slightly different quantum signature. We have to get a precise scan of our target, analyze its energy output in real time, and then tune the emitter accordingly. The process takes, at minimum, 90 seconds of sustained, close-range contact. Jax, who had been listening silently, let out a low whistle. 90 seconds, point-blank range, against a ship that can eat a planetoid. That's not a battle, Anya, that's a suicide run. "It's the only way," Anya insisted, her gaze shifting to Savin. "Our conventional weapons are worse than useless. They make the Vora stronger. This is the only tool we have that doesn't just feed it." Savin studied the simulation, his mind already running through the tactical nightmare. The Stalwart was a heavy cruiser, built for slugging matches at long range, not for delicate surgical strikes that required it to sit still next to a god. "How long until we can have a prototype emitter operational?" he asked. "We've fabricated the main components," Anya replied. "The Nagia designs are remarkably efficient. We can have it installed and tested within 48 hours. But the targeting and calibration systems will need a live test against a real Vora vessel. There is no way to simulate that." The decision weighed heavily on Savin. To seek out the very thing that had nearly destroyed them, to deliberately fly into its embrace for a chance to wound it, was a commander's worst nightmare. But the alternative was to run, to hide, and to wait for the swarm to find human space. He thought of the billions of lives on Earth, on Mars, on the Centauri habitats, going about their lives in blissful ignorance of the devourer in the dark. He had a duty to them that outweighed his duty to his own crew. "Make it ready," he said, his voice leaving no room for debate. "Jax, I want you to work with Anya on the tactical implementation. We need a way to survive that 90-second window. New shield harmonics, evasive patterns, point defense priorities, everything. We get one shot at this." As he left the lab, the weight of command felt heavier than ever. He was gambling the lives of everyone on his ship on the dying gift of a long-dead alien race. The next 2 days were a blur of activity. The new device, christened the Resonance Lance by the crew, was installed in the space formerly occupied by the ship's primary forward plasma battery. It was an unassuming piece of equipment, a polished sphere of Nagia alloy surrounded by a lattice of human-made focusing rings. Meanwhile, Jax and his team had overhauled the ship's defensive systems. Analyzing the Vora's entropy beams, they had developed a countermeasure, a rapidly cycling shield frequency that hoped to outrun the decay effect, if only for a few precious seconds. It was untested, a theory born of desperation. The point defense networks were recalibrated for maximum rate of fire, prioritizing the destruction of the Vora fighter swarm over all else. The entire crew knew what was coming. The fear was palpable, a cold mist in the recycled air, but it was met with a hardened resolve. They had a weapon now. They were no longer prey. Their chance to test it came sooner than expected. A long-range scan, powered by a jury-rigged array, picked up a Vora energy signature 2 systems over. It was moving towards a yellow star system that, according to stellar cartography, contained a fledgling human colony world, Viridia, an agricultural world home to barely 1 million souls. They were its next meal. There was no time for further preparation. The stalwart, still scarred and patched, its shift drive held together with hope and ingenuity, plotted an intercept course. The jump was short, but the strain on the damaged drive was immense, the ship shuddering and groaning as if it would tear itself apart. When they re-entered normal space on the outer edge of the Viridia system, the sight that greeted them was one of unfolding horror. The Vora harvester was already there, its monstrous form silhouetted against the gentle green and blue marble of Viridia. Tendrils of green energy were already lashing down into the upper atmosphere, and they could see the gray, spreading patches on the planet's surface where life was being systematically unmade and drawn up into the beast above. Distress signals from the planet flooded their comms, frantic, terrified voices pleading for help that would never come from anywhere else. "All hands, battle stations," Savin's voice was calm over the ship-wide intercom, a rock in the rising tide of panic. "This is what we trained for. This is why we are here. Helm, take us in. Anya, start your scan. Jax, the second that swarm launches, I want a wall of fire between us and them." The stalwart accelerated towards the Leviathan, a tiny, brave moth flying into a hurricane of fire. The Vora ship took notice of them almost immediately. It recognized the vessel it had wounded before, the irritant that had escaped. This time, it did not send a swarm. The entire harvester began to reorient itself, its vast bulk turning with impossible speed to face the stalwart head-on. Its central maw opened, and the familiar, terrifying green light began to build. It was not going to bother with its children. It was going to erase them from existence with a single, concentrated blast. "They're targeting us with the primary weapon," Jax yelled. "Impact in 40 seconds. Anya status," Savin barked, his eyes fixed on the viewport on the growing sphere of annihilation. "Scan is at 30%. I need more time," she cried out, her voice strained. They were out of time. The Vora had learned too. It had identified them as the greater threat and was responding with overwhelming, immediate force. The stalwart was flying directly into the path of a shot that could consume a small moon. Savin made a split-second decision, a gamble that defied all tactical logic. "Helm full power to forward thrusters, take us straight down its throat." A stunned silence gripped the bridge for a heartbeat before the helmsman complied. The stalwart surged forward, accelerating directly towards the Vora's weapon aperture. It was a move of sheer, suicidal insanity. At this range, a near miss would still destroy them. "What are you doing?" Jax exclaimed, his tactical mind recoiling at the violation of every known combat doctrine. "Shortening the calibration time," Savin shot back, his voice tight, "and presenting the smallest possible target profile. Anya, you have until we hit that energy sphere to get me a firing solution." The gap between the two ships closed in a terrifying rush. The green sphere filled the entire viewport, a miniature sun of entropy. Alarms shrieked as the ship's sensors were overloaded by the sheer power they were approaching. The stalwart's hull began to heat up, its forward shields failing under the radiative pressure. 50 seconds to collision," the helmsman called out, his voice cracking. "Scan at 80%, Anya reported, her fingers a blur. 90, 95, I have it, tuning the resonance lance now." The sphere of the lance began to glow with a soft, white light, humming with a power that felt clean and sharp against the Vora's corrupting energy. The Vora seemed to sense the new threat. The building energy in its more faltered for a microsecond, a flicker of hesitation in the face of something it did not understand, something that was not food, but poison. The universe contracted to the space between the stalwart's prow and the incandescent heart of the Vora's weapon. The hum of the resonance lance was a high, pure note against the deep, visceral thrum of the harvester's gathering power. On the bridge, every breath was held, every eye was fixed on the main display, where Anya's progress bar crept towards 100%. The ship shuddered violently as the outer layers of its forward hull began to flake away, dissolved by the mere proximity to the Vora's unfired blast. "Shields are failing," Jax reported, his voice a raw shout over the screaming of overstressed metal. Hull integrity at 40% and dropping. Commander Savin stood immobile at the command rail, his knuckles white, his entire being focused on the calm, determined voice of his science officer. "Calibration at 98%, 99, the green sphere ahead pulsed, on the verge of release. They were out of time. "Fire," Savin roared the command the instant Anya's console chimed its completion. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a beam of pure, coherent white energy lanced out from the stalwart. It was not a destructive blast. It was a precise, elegant thread of light, no wider than a man's arm, that struck the very center of the Vora's green sphere. There was no explosion. Instead, the virulent green light seemed to stutter and fracture. A deep, resonant vibration passed through the Vora ship, a shudder that was felt more than heard, a fundamental wrongness that rippled through its colossal structure. The green sphere collapsed in on itself, and the Vora's maw snapped shut, a pained, convulsive motion. The ship itself let out a silent scream into the void, a burst of chaotic, pained energy across every spectrum. Inside the Vora harvester, the effect was catastrophic. The resonance lance's frequency had found its mark, traveling up the beam of the harvester's own weapon and into its core. The delicate balance of the artificial singularity was shattered. The oscillation began, a violent, uncontrollable shaking that tore at the biological mechanical bonds holding the ship together. Vast sections of the chitinous hull bulged and then ruptured, spewing forth torrents of half-digested matter and viscous, internal fluids. The green energy source across its body flickered and died, plunging parts of the Leviathan into darkness. The stalwart, still carrying its forward momentum, shot past the convulsing monster, so close that the viewport was filled with the horrifying, intimate detail of its death throes. They had passed through the eye of the hurricane and emerged on the other side. "It's working," Anya cried, her face alight with a mixture of triumph and awe as she watched the sensor data. "The singularity is destabilizing, cascade failure is imminent." A cheer started to rise on the bridge, a release of pent-up terror and tension, but Savin cut it off with a sharp gesture. "This isn't over yet. Helm, bring us about Jack's status report." The ship swung around in a wide arc, presenting its less damaged starboard side to the dying behemoth. The Vora harvester was a wreck of its former self, its graceful, predatory form now a twisted, broken mess. Internal explosions rippled along its length, and it had begun to list, its course now an uncontrolled drift. But it was not dead yet. As if in a final, spiteful act, a last cluster of its fighter swarm launched from a ruptured bay, skittering towards the stalwart with mindless, automated aggression. They were fewer in number, disorganized, but still deadly. "Incoming hostiles," Jax announced, his voice all business again. "Point defense, engage, target their engines, try to disable them." The new shield harmonics proved their worth. The first few entropy beams from the fighters splashed against the stalwart's shields, which flared and shimmered but held, the rapid cycling managing to disperse the decay effect just long enough for the shields to regenerate. It wasn't perfect. A few beams got through, scoring deep gashes in the hull, but it was a far cry from the systematic dismantling of their first encounter. The point defense network, now focused and unburdened by the mothership's overwhelming presence, made short work of the remaining fighters, painting the space around them with brief, satisfying flashes of light. As the last fighter was vaporized, a final, massive internal detonation tore the Vora harvester apart from the inside. The uncontrolled singularity at its heart was finally released, and for a brief, terrifying moment, a tiny black hole hung in space where the city-sized ship had been, voraciously sucking in the debris of its own body before evaporating in a flash of hawking radiation. The unmaking had been unmade. The bridge was silent, the crew staring at the empty space where their nemesis had been. The only sound was the steady beeping of damage control alerts and the ragged breathing of the men and women who had just stared into the abyss and watched it blink first. They had done it. They had killed a god. Savin allowed himself a moment, just a single, deep breath, to feel the weight lift from his shoulders. Then, the practicalities of command reasserted themselves. Damage report. The lists were long. The stalwart was in a dire state. The forward sections were a wreck, life support was failing on multiple decks, and the shift drive was now critically damaged, its motivators fused into a solid block of melted composite. They were alive, but they were stranded, more so than before. Their victory was absolute, but their survival was once again in question. Their attention was drawn back to Viridia. The planet below was scarred, a continent-sized grey blotch on its surface where the Vora had begun its feast, but the process had been halted. The tendrils of energy were gone. The planet lived. Faint, hopeful signals were now rising from the surface, messages of thanks and wonder from the colonists who had witnessed the battle in their sky, who had seen their saviors arrive in a wounded ship and slay the dragon. The stalwart had become a legend in a single engagement, but legends still needed oxygen and functional engines. Savin opened a channel to the colony governor. "Viridia Command, this is Commander Savin of the Earthship Stalwart. The immediate threat is neutralized. We are assessing our damage. Stand by for assistance as we are able." The gratitude that poured back was overwhelming, but it was followed by a sobering offer. "Commander, we have limited orbital facilities, but we have raw materials and manpower. Whatever we have is yours. You saved our world. Let us help save your ship." What followed was a week of grueling, cooperative labor. Shuttles from Viridia ferried engineers and materials up to the stalwart, while the ship's fabricators, working in tandem with the colony's industrial printers, began the slow process of manufacturing replacement parts. The work was slow and dangerous, conducted in the harsh environment of space, but there was a new spirit among the crew and the colonists. They were no longer just survivors, they were partners, the first line of a new alliance between the military and the civilians it protected. It was during this period that Anya, reviewing the data from the destroyed harvester, made a chilling discovery. The Vora swarm operated on a hive mind intelligence, a distributed consciousness. The death of the single harvester had sent a shockwave through that consciousness, a ripple of not pain but data, a warning. The swarm now knew. It knew that its mindless consumption had encountered something new, something that could fight back. It knew that the prey had grown teeth. And somewhere, in the dark between the stars, the greater part of that consciousness was turning its attention towards the source of this new, interesting data. The war was not over. It had just begun. The atmosphere aboard the stalwart was a strange howl of triumph and grim anticipation. They had repaired the worst of the damage, thanks to the tireless efforts of their own crew and the grateful colonists of Viridia. The ship was space-worthy again, its hull patched and scarred, a testament to its ordeal. The shift drive, however, remained a critical weakness. The engineers had managed a workaround, a bypass that would allow for one, perhaps two, more long-range jumps before the core would fail completely. They were a clock with one tick left. Commander Savin stood on the bridge, watching the final supply shuttles depart from Viridia's orbit. The green and blue world below was healing, the grey scar of the Vora's attack already showing faint signs of new growth at its edges, a resilience that mirrored their own. They had saved a world, but the cost of that victory was now becoming clear. Anya's discovery had sent a chill through the entire command staff. The Vora hive mind was aware of them. The death of the harvester had not been a silent event. It had been a scream in the dark, a beacon pointing directly at them. The data we recovered from the harvester's final moments is disturbing, Anya said in the latest briefing, her face drawn. She displayed a complex waveform on the hollow table. This is the hive mind signal. It's a form of quantum entanglement communication, instantaneous across any distance. The death of the scout created a massive perturbation in the signal. It was an anomaly report, and the response was not one of anger or fear, it was curiosity. She zoomed in on a section of the waveform. The overall signal strength from the core of the swarm, which our models place in the galactic core, increased by several orders of magnitude. They've reprioritized. We are no longer just another source of biomass. We are a problem to be solved, a variable to be understood and eliminated. Jax leaned forward, his expression grim. So, we've gone from being a snack to being a threat. I'm not sure that's an improvement. What's their response time? Impossible to calculate with certainty, Anya admitted. The Nagia records suggest the Vora can move through gravitational tides, using black holes and neutron stars as shortcuts. A significant force could be here in a matter of weeks, maybe less. They won't send another scout, they'll send a fleet. The reality of their situation was inescapable. They had one functional resonance lance and a crippled ship against an incoming armada of world eaters that now knew their one vulnerability. They had to get the technology and the data back to Earth. Humanity had to mobilize, to retrofit its entire fleet, to prepare for a war of survival. The Stalwart was no longer just a ship. It was a courier carrying the fate of their species. The decision on where to jump was a tactical nightmare. The direct route to the core systems was the most logical, but it was also the most predictable. The Vora hive mind, having analyzed the Stalwart's initial escape vector and the location of Viridia, would likely anticipate a return to populated space. They would set an ambush. Savin gathered his senior staff. A direct course is what they will expect, he stated, pointing to the stellar cartography display. so we will not take it. We will jump deeper into the fringe, towards the Ghoul's Nebula." A murmur of surprise went around the table. The Ghoul's Nebula was an unmapped, turbulent region of space, filled with radiation, gravitational anomalies, and the remnants of dead stars. It was a navigator's nightmare, a place where sensors were blind and shift drives were unreliable. "It's suicide," the chief engineer protested. "The drive won't handle the gravitational shear. We'd be torn apart." "It's a calculated risk," Savin countered. "The Vora rely on predictable physics and abundant resources. The nebula offers neither. It's the one place they might not look, and the one environment where our smaller, more adaptable ship might have an advantage over their larger vessels. We go through the nebula, and we emerge on the far side, closer to the Cygnus listening post. We send our data burst from there." It was a desperate plan, but it was the only one that offered a sliver of hope against an enemy that could predict their logic. The crew prepared for the jump with a solemn intensity. They were not just running for their lives, they were threading a needle in the dark, hoping the darkness itself would hide them. The final systems checks were completed, and the stalwart positioned itself at the edge of the Viridia system. "All stations report ready for shift," Jack said, his voice formal. "The drive is holding at 90% of rated capacity. We cannot ask for more." Savin took one last look at the peaceful image of Viridia on the viewport. It was a sight worth fighting for, worth dying for. "Execute the jump." The helmsman engaged the drive. The shift was violent, far worse than any before. The ship groaned and shrieked as if it were being physically torn apart. Alarms blared as systems overloaded. The viewport showed a maelstrom of color and light, the normal star streaks replaced by a chaotic swirl of purples and reds. For a terrifying minute, it seemed the engineer's prediction would come true, and the stalwart would be scattered across higher dimensions. Then, as suddenly as it began, the turbulence ceased. They were through. The viewport cleared to reveal the Ghoul's Nebula in all its terrifying glory. It was a vast, swirling cloud of dust and gas, lit from within by the faint glow of dying stars. Tendrils of cosmic dust curled like the fingers of a phantom, and the background radiation created a constant, hissing static on the sensors. They were blind, deaf, and utterly alone in a stellar graveyard. For days, they navigated the treacherous currents, their progress slow and cautious. The strain on the crew was immense. The constant, low-level radiation triggered minor system failures and kept the medical team busy treating the crew for exposure. The silence of the nebula was oppressive, a heavy blanket that smothered sound and hope in equal measure. They were ghosts in a machine, drifting through a tomb. It was on the third day that the sensors, struggling to pierce the interference, picked up a contact. It was not the clean, horrific signature of a Vora harvester, but something else, something ancient and powerful, dormant within the heart of the nebula. It was a signal, faint but unmistakable, and it was calling to them. The signal was a siren's song in the static, a complex, repeating pattern that stood out against the natural chaos of the Ghoul's Nebula like a perfect diamond in a field of gravel. It was old, impossibly so, its carrier wave exhibiting a technological signature that was neither human nor Nagia. For Commander Savin and his exhausted crew, adrift in this stellar purgatory, it was both a lifeline and a potential trap. "Can you pinpoint the source?" Savin asked, his voice low in the hushed atmosphere of the bridge. The nebula's interference made every sensor reading fuzzy, a ghost in the machine. Anya worked at her console, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the alien signal. "It's difficult, Commander. The radiation is scattering the source, but it's coming from a gravitational anomaly at the nebula's core. A neutron star, I believe. The signal is originating from its immediate vicinity." A neutron star, one of the most dangerous objects in the universe, a stellar corpse with a gravity field that could spaghettify their ship from 1,000,000 kilometers away. To investigate the signal meant navigating a navigational nightmare to get to a place of certain death. Jax was immediately skeptical. "It's a Vora trap. They lured us here, They know we're damaged, and they're using this as bait. Anya shook her head, her scientific curiosity battling with her fear. The signal structure is all wrong for the Vora. Their communications are chaotic, a torrent of data. This is elegant, mathematical. It's a beacon, a homing signal, and it's been broadcasting for a very, very long time, long before the Vora ever encountered us. Savin weighed their options. They were low on power, their shift drive was a time bomb, and the Vora swarm was undoubtedly hunting them. To ignore the signal was to continue their slow, blind drift through the nebula, waiting to be found or to succumb to system failure. To follow, it was to risk everything on another alien mystery. But the Nagia Data Core had given them their only weapon. Perhaps this was another piece of the puzzle. We've trusted alien science once before, and it saved Viridia, Savin said, his decision made. We'll proceed with extreme caution. Helm, plot a micro-jump series, the shortest hops you can manage. I want us on the outer edge of that neutron star's influence, nothing more. The journey to the core was a masterclass in tense piloting. The helmsman, Riven, navigated the swirling dust clouds and violent energy surges with a surgeon's touch, making tiny, precise shifts that barely stressed the damaged drive. The gravitational pull of the neutron star began to dominate their senses, a terrifyingly steep well in the fabric of spacetime. As they drew closer, the source of the signal resolved on their long-range scanners. It was not a planet or a station. It was a ship, or rather the skeleton of one. It was vast, larger than the Vora Harvester, but it was clearly derelict, its hull pitted and scarred by eons of exposure to the nebula's harsh environment. Its design was angular and geometric, built from a dark, non-reflective material that seemed to drink the faint light of the nebula. It hung in a precise, geosynchronous orbit just beyond the neutron star's Roche limit, a silent sentinel in a gravitational maelstrom. No power readings, no life signs, Jax reported, his tactical mind analyzing the derelict. It's a tomb, but that beacon is still active. They maneuvered the stalwart into a parallel orbit, a delicate ballet performed under the crushing gaze of the dead star. A boarding party was assembled, led by Jax himself. Savin would remain on the bridge, a nervous captain watching his first officer and a team of specialists cross the gulf to the ancient vessel. The boarding shuttle docked with an airlock that irised open with a surprising, silent smoothness, as if it had been waiting for them. Inside, the derelict was a frozen moment in time. The atmosphere was thin and cold, the gravity artificial but weak. The corridors were wide and high-ceilinged, built for a species that was likely taller and more slender than humans. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, only a profound, deep silence. The walls were covered in intricate, glowing glyphs that pulsed with a soft, blue light, a language of pure geometry. Anya, who had joined the boarding party, was mesmerized. This technology, it's on a level beyond the Nagia, beyond anything I've ever seen. The power source is dormant, but the systems are intact. They're in a state of perfect preservation. They made their way to what could only be the ship's bridge. In the center of the circular room was a large, crystalline console. As Jax and Anya approached, it activated, projecting a holographic figure into the center of the room. It was humanoid, tall and elegant, with large, dark eyes and a serene expression. It was not a living being, but a recording, an echo. The figure spoke, its voice a soft, melodic sound that was simultaneously translated by the ship's systems, the glyphs on the walls shifting to form subtitles in standard. I am the last custodian of the Ark ship Eternity's Vigil. If you are hearing this, then our long watch has ended, and the cycle has begun anew. We were the Zenthar, shepherds of life in this galaxy. The recording explained a history that dwarfed human comprehension. The Zenthar were an ancient race, the first in the galaxy to achieve sentience millions of years ago. They had explored the cosmos and discovered a fundamental truth. The Vora were not a species, but a natural, galactic-scale phenomenon, a cosmic reset mechanism. They emerged from the galactic core every 50 million years to cleanse the galaxy of advanced life, a brutal form of population control that allowed new life to rise from the ashes. The Zenthar had tried to fight them, as the Nagia had, and had failed. But instead of dying, they had gone into hiding, dedicating their civilization to finding a permanent solution, a way to break the cycle. This ship, the Eternity's Vigil, was one of their secret archives, a watchpost and a weapons depot. We could not defeat the unmaking with force, for it adapts, the hologram continued. But we discovered its origin. The Vora are not the disease, they are the symptom. They are created by a flaw in the fabric of spacetime itself, a wound at the galaxy's heart that periodically bleeds forth this hunger. We designed a device, the God-Killer, not to destroy the Vora, but to heal the wound, to seal the breach and end the cycle forever. The Zenthar custodian gestured, and a schematic appeared beside it, a complex, city-sized device of impossible geometry. The blueprint is here, the materials, the knowledge, but we grew old, and our time ended before we could deploy it. The Vora of our age consumed us. We have held this vigil, waiting for a species young enough to be unpredictable, resilient enough to survive the first encounter, and brave enough to finish what we started. The hologram looked directly at Jax and Anya, its dark eyes seeming to hold a universe of sorrow and hope. The weapon is your responsibility now. The location of the breach is encoded in this ship's core. You must go to the heart of the galaxy. You must end this. The transmission ended, and the hologram faded. In the silence of the ancient bridge, the weight of millennia settled on the shoulders of the humans from the stalwart. They had come seeking a way to deliver a warning, and they had found a quest to save all of creation. They were no longer just soldiers or survivors. They were the inheritors of a legacy, the chosen ones to carry a torch lit millions of years ago. The war for humanity's survival had just become a war for the future of the galaxy itself.